Hello there. Today I'd like to talk about the former Federal Reserve advisor that allegedly spied for China. I would also like to talk about all the other similar, although not quite the same occurrences. Basically, we've had quite a few Democrats that have been implicated in connection to Chinese surveillance, not always knowingly. Unlike here, where the guy is literally a spy, allegedly, for China. So, federal authorities have arrested a former Federal Reserve senior advisor for allegedly giving inside economic information to China. This is from the Associated Press. So, grand jury indictment accuses John Harold Rogers, 63, of Vienna, Virginia, of stealing Federal Reserve trade secrets and selling them to Chinese intelligence officials for at least $450,000 by posing as a university professor in China. He is also accused of lying to Federal Reserve investigators and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau officials. The Department of Justice announced Rogers' indictment and arrest on Friday, the same day he made his first appearance before Washington court. I believe this is from the February 2nd, a couple of days ago. So, Rogers is being held without bond and is scheduled to be arraigned Tuesday according to court records. The attorney for this guy says Dr. Rogers denies the allegations as set forth in the indictment and that he will say more at a later date. Assistant Director Kevin Vondran of the FBI Counterintelligence Division said in a statement that Rogers betrayed his country while employed at the Federal Reserve by providing restricted U.S. financial and economic information to Chinese government intelligence officers. The information could allow adversaries to illegally gain a strategic economic advantage at the expense of the U.S. The Justice Department said the information could allow China to manipulate the U.S. market in a manner similar to insider trading. If you know, insider trading is exceedingly profitable. For example, it is known that Warren Buffett is a very skilled investor. However, we have had certain members of Congress, particularly Democrats, for example, the family members of Nancy Pelosi, who have more than doubled in percentages, the amount of profit that he makes at times. And truly, they must be investment geniuses or engaging in insider trading, one or the other. So think about the amount of money that China, with their leverage as a very strong financial power on the world stage, could have if they employed similar means. Truly, it is mind-boggling how bad it would be for the US economy and, of course, the people who depend on it. Because if you remember the old saying, when the US gets the cold, the rest of the world sneezes. There are many countries that depend on US aid, trade, or even just influence in the political international sphere. And I don't think it's good for us either. But I suppose for most Americans, this is a secondary consideration at best. You are more likely concerned, and fairly so, with your economy being exploited and your money going to China. Definitely this guy, if he is guilty, of course, deserves a very lengthy sentence and a massive fine. So, Rogers is a US citizen with a doctorate in economics, worked for the Federal Reserve from 2020 till 2021. According to the indictment, let's see. I don't know why they repeat the same sentence. Anyway, prosecutors allege that Rogers and two Chinese co-conspirators began communicating as early as 2013. The indictment asserts that Rogers later forwarded protected information to his personal email or made print copies to pass along to his co-conspirators. The cage allegedly included proprietary economic data and analysis, briefing books written for Federal Reserve governors, details of Federal Open Market Committee deliberations and future announcements, and accounts of conversations about tariffs targeted at China, according to the indictment. Rogers is accused of meeting co-conspirators in China for multiple visits under the guise of him being an academic instructor, teaching them as students. The indictment alleges that in 2023, so 1 year alone, Rogers received $450,000 as a part-time professor at a Chinese university. So presumably, if this is just a cover, he didn't actually earn the money. This is and once again, this may be one single means of passing money to him during one single year. That guy might have made millions or even tens of millions across the entire period that he was spying for China, just based on the calculations you can make here alone. Now, I had a little inquiry with Grok here, and it's interesting that they have a bit more aggregated with the AI about the story. So they do go on about how he didn't just teach students as a cover for passing information. It's also that he disguised interactions with Chinese intelligence operatives as academic engagements. He met them in his hotel rooms under the guise of teaching classes, and they posed as graduate students. They say here that if he's convicted, he faces up to 15 years in prison for the espionage charge and a potential fine of $5 million. And he's also charged with making false statements, which carries its own penalties. It says here that the Department of Justice and the FBI officials have emphasized the gravity of the situation, highlighting how such actions could undermine US financial stability and national security. This case has been portrayed as part of a broader effort by China to gain economic advantage through espionage. Now, I asked about similar occurrences that could be part of this broader effort by China to gain an economic advantage through espionage, and of course, nobody could forget the Hunter Biden story, where he was involved with CEFC, a Chinese state-backed energy conglomerate, and basically received a lot of money, despite the fact that he had no background in energy management, advisory capacity, or anything of the sort. He was very young at the time and was hired and received millions for it. So the accusation, of course, is that he peddled influence. His father was at the time the vice president of the United States, so he essentially sold access to the highest levels of government in return for money. And the claims from the House Oversight Committee that Joe Biden received $40,000 in what was described as laundered China money through a personal check from his brother James and sister-in-law Sarah Biden. This followed a series of financial transactions after Hunter Biden demanded a $10 million payment from CEFC. So this is emblematic, essentially, just an example of the ways that the Chinese government had access and dealings with the Biden family. There was also Eric Swalwell, who dated Feng, Christine Feng, who was essentially a Chinese spy, it appears. He didn't know about it at the time, presumably, but information might have leaked. Then there was Dianne Feinstein, who had a driver and an office staff member for nearly 20 years, who was revealed to have been an intelligence officer for China. He was hired in the early 1990s and worked for Feinstein until the FBI uncovered his true role in 2013. Then there are, of course, examples in other countries, European Parliament, Australia, Ireland, and so forth. So this is a pattern of behavior from China. We know that they do this, and we also know that pretty much all the examples that Grok could find me and that I remember having read, newspapers and politics at the time, pretty much all the examples are Democrats. It appears that the Democratic Party is far more vulnerable to infiltration by China, and I can see why. There's far more media scrutiny of Republicans than of Democrats. If you check, even the most left-wing websites would admit that the mainstream press leans Democrat, and that coverage of Democrats tend to be much more positive, and coverage of Republicans, especially in the Trump era, tends to be overwhelmingly negative. So, of course, if there is any connection with a Chinese spy, the media would have a field day with it, and it's one time that they would actually do something useful, because I do not like Western countries being infiltrated by communists. Whether the person influenced is Republican or Democrat doesn't matter. I would be headhunting for either politically, of course. Now, I'm going to point out further, China has literal police stations in Western countries where they essentially use operation bases to hunt for dissidents or to influence expats in order to get them to do what the Chinese Communist Party wants, including espionage. I think that this is a ridiculous state of affairs that should be stopped. Unfortunately, neither the Republicans nor the Democrats actually talk about it, let alone try and do anything about it. That said, I would still trust Republicans more to resist Chinese influence. I remember the ridiculousness of the Democrats going, Trump is racist for wanting to be tough on China, and then moving during election season when they saw it's very popular to be tough on China, to saying that Trump is soft on China and Joe Biden is the candidate that will be tough against China and represent the US interests. It was one of the most bizarre turnarounds. Although Kamala Harris smashed that and more when she started saying that actually the wall is her idea. If you remember, during the last election cycle, it was very strange. No, she's going to build the wall, not Trump. Trump procrastinated, he didn't do it. Yeah, that was strange. I mean, mental gymnastics seems to be an integral part of being a Democrat these days, which is unfortunate, you know. I still remember the times where Democrats were anti-war, anti-big corporations, big pharma, the military-industrial complex. I remember the time when they were concerned about the environment, truly talking about oil spills and microplastics and heavy metals in your fish and such, because, you know, you fill the ocean with heavy metals, plastics, and chemicals, which is awful. So back then, they actually had opinions that the average person could relate to and that were anchored in reality. And it's really a shame to see the transformation, but I suppose it makes it easier for China, so they must be happy. Regardless, I do think we need to be wary of our elected officials being influenced. China does this all over the world, and I'm sure everyone has some espionage going on. I'm sure everyone wants to try and get an advantage, know in advance what their enemies and even allies are planning. I'm not claiming that my own country of Israel is never spying on anyone, even on our allies. I do believe that we do. We, if you remember, had a famous spy, Jonathan Pollard, on the US, I mean. But all the same, it's part of the political game to do so. The US has also been spying on its own allies. Everyone does it. It's just the extent of it, and also the sort of offensive nature of the Chinese espionage regime. Essentially, the fact that they coerce expats, Chinese citizens that move to other countries through threats, whether for themselves or families, especially if they have families in China. They're known to doing this, and also the use of espionage is very offensive in China, stealing your industrial secrets, your intellectual property, and of course state secrets in order to manipulate your economy, buy out national important projects, rails, docks and such. It's just, China is very, very imperialistic, let's say, with its espionage, and I believe a country suffers far more damage if China gets your secrets than if Norway, Britain, or Israel gets your secrets. Also, the type of secrets they go after seems to be a little different. It's not so much, well, what are you going to do on the world stage and how is it going to influence us, but rather, how are we going to take advantage of this information to get power over your economy, or a military advantage, for example, if you know the Chinese expansionism into Africa and overseas as well. It's not very pleasant, ask Taiwan. That said, I don't hate the Chinese people. I just think the current communist government is awful, and we should all be wary of it, that's all. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.